The decision hit like a quiet weight on the shoulders of thousands of Canadian families. A $15 billion investment that was supposed to secure the future of auto manufacturing in Ontario, bring thousands of new jobs, and help Canada lead in electric vehicles, now on hold. For workers in Alliston, for suppliers across the province, and for everyone whose livelihood touches this industry, the news raises real questions about stability, about the next paycheck, and about what kind of economy we're building in this country. Welcome back to Canada Pulse. I'm glad you're here with us. This is the kind of story we follow closely because it touches so many parts of Canadian life: good-paying jobs, trade relationships, government policy, and the everyday reality of communities that have built cars for generations. If you want clear-eyed analysis on how federal decisions and international pressures affect real people, you're in the right place. Stick with us through this one. These are the stories that matter. Let's start with what we know. Honda Canada has confirmed it's pausing its ambitious $15 billion expansion plans centered on electric vehicle production and battery manufacturing at its Alliston facilities. The project, first announced with considerable fanfare a couple of years ago, was expected to create thousands of direct jobs and even more in the supply chain. It was positioned as a cornerstone of Canada's transition to a greener auto future. Now that future feels a little further away. Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped forward this week to address the setback. In his measured style, the former central banker turned national leader didn't sugarcoat the difficulties. He pointed directly to the impact of U.S. tariffs under President Donald Trump as a major contributing factor, describing them as unjustified and disruptive to the highly integrated North American auto industry. Carney emphasized that his government is actively engaged, working with the company, with the province, and with American counterparts to find a path forward. But he also acknowledged the broader economic headwinds. You could sense the careful calibration in his words. Carney knows this file. He understands markets. He knows how quickly investor confidence can shift when trade policy becomes unpredictable. To really appreciate what's happening here, we need to go back a bit. Honda has been part of the Canadian industrial landscape for decades. The Alliston plant, located about an hour northwest of Toronto, opened in the 1980s and has become one of the most important manufacturing sites in the country. Over the years, it has produced millions of Civics, CR-Vs, and other models that Canadians drive every day. The workforce there is skilled, experienced, and proud of what they build. When the big EV announcement came, it felt like validation. After years of talking about the need to modernize Canada's auto sector, here was a major Japanese manufacturer committing serious capital to build the next generation of vehicles right here. Governments poured in incentives. Federal and provincial money flowed. There were announcements, ribbon cuttings, optimistic projections about battery plants, new technology centers, and training programs for young Canadians entering the trades. Now the pause. Reports from Japan and industry insiders suggest a combination of factors: slower than expected consumer adoption of electric vehicles in the massive U.S. market, persistent high interest rates affecting car loans, infrastructure challenges around charging stations, and yes, the added cost and uncertainty created by 25% tariffs on Canadian auto exports to the United States. This integrated supply chain is something most Canadians don't think about daily, but it's the backbone of the industry. A single vehicle might cross the border multiple times during assembly. An engine part made in Ontario, a transmission from the American Midwest, electronics from elsewhere. The old NAFTA, now USMCA, was designed to make this seamless. Tariffs throw sand into that well-oiled machine. The scale of the Canadian auto sector is easy to understate. It contributes more than $50 billion annually to our GDP in direct and indirect ways. Over 100,000 people work directly in vehicle assembly and parts manufacturing, with hundreds of thousands more in logistics, dealerships, engineering, and related services. In Ontario alone, the sector is a cornerstone of the provincial economy. Towns like Alliston, Woodstock, Ingersoll, and Windsor have grown around these plants. Families have built lives expecting steady work, overtime, benefits, and the ability to raise kids on solid middle-class wages. When an investment of this size gets delayed, the ripple effects start small but spread. Suppliers who are gearing up for new contracts put hiring plans on ice. Local restaurants and retailers that depend on plant workers feel the caution in spending. Young people considering apprenticeships in welding, robotics, or electrical systems start asking whether the opportunities will still be there. I want to be clear here. This is not the end of Honda in Canada. Current production lines continue. Civics and CR-Vs are still rolling out. The pause targets the future EV and battery expansion specifically. That's an important distinction. Existing jobs are protected for the moment, but the growth that was promised, the new chapter, is now uncertain. Mark Carney's response reflects his broader approach to governance. Coming from the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, he brings a global perspective. He sees this through the lens of macroeconomic stability, currency impacts, and long-term competitiveness. His government has been trying to thread the needle, meeting climate targets, supporting workers in traditional industries, and negotiating with a difficult American administration. On the other side of the aisle, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been sharp in his criticism. He argues that years of heavy-handed regulations, aggressive EV mandates, and carbon pricing have made Canadian manufacturing less competitive at exactly the wrong time. Poilievre and his team suggest that businesses need more predictability and lower costs, not more subsidies tied to green targets. The NDP and Bloc have their own angles, focusing on worker protections and questioning whether enough is being done to shield Canadian industry from American protectionism. All these voices reflect real tensions in Canadian public policy. How do we balance environmental goals with economic survival? How much should government intervene when global markets shift? And how do we maintain sovereignty while being deeply integrated with the world's largest economy next door? Let's talk numbers for a moment, because they matter. Before the latest tariff threats, Canada exported roughly $100 billion worth of vehicles and parts to the United States every year. The U.S. is our customer, our partner, and sometimes our competitor. When tariffs rise, even temporarily, they increase costs for manufacturers, who then have to decide whether to absorb them, pass them on to consumers, or shift production. Honda isn't alone in feeling this pressure. Other automakers have also expressed concerns. Toyota, GM, Stellantis, Ford all have significant Canadian footprints. Each has made noises about reassessing investments, depending on how trade negotiations unfold. The USMCA itself is up for review in the coming years, and that creates another layer of strategic uncertainty for boardrooms in Tokyo, Detroit, and Stuttgart. On the EV adoption side, the picture is more nuanced than headlines often suggest. Yes, sales have grown, but they've cooled from the rapid pace many predicted. Canadian consumers face higher sticker prices for EVs, cold weather reduces range, and charging infrastructure, while expanding, still lags in rural and smaller communities. Many families prefer hybrids as a practical bridge. Honda has always been known for pragmatic engineering. Their decision reflects that same thinking. Don't rush if the market isn't fully there yet. For communities like Alliston, this feels personal. These aren't abstract economic statistics. These are people who coach hockey, volunteer at the food bank, pay mortgages, and plan retirements around the stability of the plant. One longtime worker I spoke with described the mood as cautiously optimistic but disappointed. They want to build EVs. They believe Canada can compete. They just need the conditions to make sense. Provincially, Premier Doug Ford has been actively involved. Ontario has skin in the game with its own incentive packages and a clear interest in keeping manufacturing strong. Federal-provincial coordination will be crucial here. We've seen it work before during the 2008 financial crisis, when government stepped in to support the sector through restructuring. We've seen it during the COVID chip shortages when supply chains seized up. This moment feels different because it's a mix of trade policy, technology transition, and shifting consumer preferences all hitting at once. It's not one crisis, but a convergence. What are the potential paths forward? Analysts suggest several scenarios. In the more positive one, US-Canada trade talks produce enough clarity that Honda restarts the project within 12 to 24 months. Demand for EVs rebounds as battery costs fall and infrastructure improves. Canadian critical minerals, lithium, nickel, cobalt, become a stronger part of the domestic supply chain, giving us leverage. In a more challenging scenario, the pause drags on. Other manufacturers follow suit. Canada has to recalibrate its auto strategy, perhaps putting more emphasis on hybrid technology, high-value components, software, or even defense-related manufacturing where we have strengths. Diversification becomes more than a buzzword. Mark Carney has spoken often about the need for Canada to build economic resilience. This test will show whether that vision can translate into results on the factory floor. His government is reportedly looking at additional targeted supports, skills training investments, and possibly adjustments to incentive programs to make Canadian plants more attractive, even in a tariff environment. There's also the human element that often gets lost in policy discussions. What does this mean for a 28-year-old apprentice who just finished their Red Seal certification, hoping to work on battery systems? What about the parts supplier who employs 200 people in a small town town outside Kitchener? What about the young families who moved to Alliston because of the promise of stable work? These are the stories behind the statistics. Canada Pulse tries to keep them front and center because policy isn't made in a vacuum. It lands in people's lives. Broader questions emerge too. Are we too dependent on the U.S. market? Should Canada be pursuing more trade diversification with Europe, Asia, or even emerging markets? How aggressive should we be in retaliatory measures if tariffs persist? These aren't easy questions, and reasonable people disagree on the answers. As a country, we've faced manufacturing challenges before. The shift away from textiles, the ups and downs in forestry and resources, the auto bailouts of the past. Each time, Canada has adapted. Workers have shown remarkable resilience. Companies have innovated. Governments have tried, with mixed success, to smooth the transitions. The difference today is the speed of technological change and the weaponization of trade policy in an increasingly tense geopolitical environment. Friendshoring, nearshoring, and strategic autonomy are the new phrases in corporate and government strategy sessions. For Canada, our advantages remain significant. Political stability, rule of law, educated workforce, abundant natural resources for the green transition, and proximity to the U.S. market. Our challenges include higher energy costs in some regions, regulatory burden, and the reality of being the smaller partner in a very unequal relationship. As this story continues to develop, we'll be watching several things closely. The tone of upcoming trade negotiations, any new support measures from Ottawa or Queen's Park, Honda's own updates from Japan, and most importantly, the impact on workers and communities. The auto sector has been part of Canada's identity for a long time. From the early days of the Auto Pact in the 1960s to the integrated production of today, building vehicles has helped create the middle class many Canadians still rely on. Protecting that legacy while adapting to new realities is one of the central economic policy challenges of this decade. We don't pretend to have all the answers here at Canada Pulse. What we do is follow the developments, talk to people on all sides, examine the data, and bring you context that goes beyond the headlines. That's our commitment. If you're watching from Ontario, from the auto communities, or simply from across Canada, wondering how this affects your job, your taxes, or your cost of living, let us know in the comments. Your perspectives help shape our coverage. We read them. The plants are still running today. Shifts are still starting on time. But the decisions being made in boardrooms and negotiating rooms right now will shape the next decade of Canadian manufacturing. We'll stay on this story as it evolves, bringing you updates with the same care and depth. Thanks for spending this time with us. If you value this kind of in-depth, responsible coverage of Canadian issues, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We're here for the long haul, following the stories that shape our country. Take care of each other out there. We'll see you in the next update.